You're listening to the Fitness Rants Podcast, the show where unfiltered conversations meet real-world health and fitness.
We cut through the noise and deep dive into the truth behind health, nutrition, physique development, and the fitness industry itself.
We're your hosts, Ross Gilmore and Malin Blumdahl, experienced coaches and educators who have been part of the fitness industry for over 15 years.
If you're a coach, high performer, or someone just tired of mainstream nonsense, you're in the right place.
Now let's get into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of the Fitness Rants Podcast. Today, we're going to get into answering a very important question. At least it's a question that both coach and client should be answering before they engage in the coaching process, which is, are you coachable? So let's dive into that. So I think when we actually at least try to make an attempt to answer that question, it starts actually before the coaching process. It starts with that initial conversation and that consultation ahead of starting coaching. So let's start there. When you're having that initial consultation with a client, and you can start with this, Mal, what are some of the things that you're sort of looking out for as positive signs that this is someone who's ready to engage in a coaching process? Put you on the spot, didn't I?
Yeah.
That's okay. My idea is I think number one, at least thing I'm trying to look for when it comes to those initial fielding questions is, where is this client's stage of readiness? So for coaches that are very seasoned, they'll know that there's a scale known as the stages of readiness for change. And we won't get into exactly which of those phases are. You've got like pre-contemplation, contemplation, etc. But we're generally just trying to get a gauge on a very high level. How ready is this client to make at least the minimum commitments to the coaching process? So I think it starts there. Is this client ready to engage in the coaching process? I think
for me, it's not necessarily just, that's part of it for sure, but also, like, you can get a sense of the way the person or the client, the person that you speak to, also talks about their goals. Like there's a certain level of like engagement and responsibility that comes from that. You can kind of get a sense of that, especially when you've had a lot of consultations. It's hard to say this is how you know, and it doesn't always necessarily work out either. Like sometimes, are you coachable? You may start the process, and then as it gets started to the process, you may actually realize, I wasn't quite ready for this. So yeah, it's...
Well, you've essentially taken all the words out of my mouth. That was exactly what I was sort of leading into, which is, so the next question that people ask was, well, how do you know if someone's ready? How do you know where they are in those stages of readiness of change? It's experience. Yes, you have to know what those stages of readiness look like, but ultimately it's going to take doing the reps, doing consults. Sometimes you get a really good feeling from a client when they have that initial consultation, and then you literally get 3-4 weeks, maybe even a few months down the line, and you just realize that at that point they've been really putting on a bit of a facade and they're not actually that ready for the change. So I think this is something for maybe younger coaches to know, is that I think coaches nowadays, they're so petrified to make mistakes. And the reality is that you're going to have to work with clients that things just don't quite go your way, don't go their way, for you to get a little bit better at sensing this. So I think that's the first thing, is trying to get a gauge of, like you said, I think the way you said that was perfect, which is their body language, their tone, the way they answer questions. Like you can sort of get a sense of how invested they are in trying to achieve the outcomes that they're trying to explain to you in the first place.
Yeah, because, a coach is only there to facilitate the journey, to make it faster for you to get to point A and point B, or where you want to get to kind of, remove the noise, provide clarity, provide the steps, keep you focused. And yes, like the programming, all of that is part of that, but that's not the most important part. But ultimately the person, the client is, you have to take responsibility for your goals and for what you want to do. So if you're not submitting your check-ins on time, and that's a repeating pattern, or you're not communicating in general, like you're not communicating, not asking questions, not if you're having a bad day, or because it's not about being perfect. Sometimes, and clients, this is a conversation I often have with my clients, they feel like, well, if they're not doing well enough, they're disappointing me, and then they feel like they're failing. But that's nothing to do with coachability. That's more, just communicate with what you're struggling with. To me, that's being coachable, because if you didn't have struggles or challenges, you wouldn't need a coach in the first place. But if you don't talk to me about these things, then how am I going to be able to help you? So yeah, like if you're not checking in, if I have to message every day to remind you to track your daily data, your progress tracking, or I've see that, and I've had clients like this, and I've learned the hard way that when I'm in these situations, it's like, well, this is not the kind of person that I want to attract, and the person I want to work with. Like I want to work with, clients are as invested in their goals as I am, because I can only match that effort as a coach. Like if you give me 100%, not perfect, but the effort, the willingness, the willingness to be vulnerable as well. Well, I'm having a bad day. I didn't do all my workouts this week. Okay, why? What happened? So we can actually sort of come, like, so we can work through and figure out what's going on. So you can push past those barriers. So
I mean, you've sort of touched on there almost some stuff that I was going to get into later.
I just gone on to like a rant there.
Like, right, we're getting in there. It's the goal of the podcast, right? But it's some of those specifics we are actually going to revisit. We're going to come back to, and we're going to do this in almost a bit of a, for lack of a better term, a bit more of a sequential fashion. I think we jumped the gun into the actual, we're coaching this client now and the process, but I think we have to almost take a few steps back. And we'll come back to one of the things you were talking about there, which is the importance of proper and efficient communication. But even before that, and this starts way back at the, not just the consultation process, but the onboarding process, the kickoff process, is managing expectations. I think that's probably one of the aspects of a coaching relationship that often gets the most mismanaged. For example, a client comes in and says, I want to achieve X, Y, Z goals within my coaching. How you respond to that, and sometimes clients will lay out goals. You can tell a difference from a seasoned coach to a less experienced coach when the coach is just so enthusiastic, like, we're going to be able to do this. And in reality, it's just not possible. And if you're not setting realistic timeframes for the goals that have been outlined, you're literally setting the client up to fail before they've even started.
This is very common with like my audience. They kind of, well, I want to look lean, I want to look toned, and they think that's going to come from just losing 5 kilos or 3 kilos or, but that is really not that's not the journey, that's not the process. Like, you're going to need to it's going to take a lot longer for you to get that toned, lean body that you want. And if you're too impatient and your expectations are not managed, then you're just going to continue to be disappointed, and it's going to be a frustrating process for me too as a coach. 100%. But that's also my responsibility as a coach to be like,
however, as you rightly pointed out, and I was talking about it from the coach's lens, we got to flip it. The client has a responsibility to manage their expectations accordingly. Yes, as a coach, of course, we need to, especially if we're experienced and we've done this plenty of times before, we need to manage those expectations. But how often have you had this where you have actually clearly outlined what's possible, yet you get weeks down the line and the client still is, it's almost like a cognitive dissonance. It's like you've told them what's possible. They still want to achieve a certain thing in an unrealistic time frame. And so exactly that. Yes, a coach can only outline what's possible. They can only explain it in numerous ways and try to keep, reiterating what that looks like. But ultimately, as a client, you've got to be willing to accept that. Some clients, it's almost like they just don't want to accept that it's going to take that long.
And this is also assuming that what needs to be done is being done. So, because we're not, this is, if everything goes to plan, and if according to, like, you do X, Y, and Z, then it's going to take this long. But if you're not doing what needs to be done, or there's sometimes things don't happen the way that's planned, and things happen in life, and this is also part of the process, then it may take even longer, depending on the goal and stuff. So you just have to have realistic expectations going into it, especially if it's beyond just, I want to lose some weight. Like, if it's more like physique transformation, health transformation, achieving a result and not going backwards after. Like, there's more to it than just a calorie deficit.
I think it's important to parse that out a little bit, because let's just say we're going to talk about realistic expectations, like you said, when it comes to a body transformation. Let's just say they're entering a fat loss phase. The thing is that we can use data, and we know based on research, based on experience, what a expected rate of loss could look like for a client during a fat loss phase. But you hit the nail on the head. That is making the assumption that they are 100% compliant. They're 100% adherent. And so as a result of that, we can't just have we expect you to lose this much weight across this many weeks, or this much body fat across many weeks. That's going to be, we're going to expect you to lose between this much and this much, between this number of weeks and this number of weeks. You have to have a range, because the reality is that humans are fallible.
And the more data you have, the better your predictions can be as well. So, like, I have a client who's in a fat loss phase right now, and it's really interesting because I always kind of look at the data, look at the average loss, and then once you have, say, 10 weeks worth of data, some weeks you may lose 0.6, another week you may lose 0, 0.1, 0.2. So it's not like the average loss is not going to be the same every week, but once you have more data, I can get a sense of what is a true weekly average loss across the weeks. And but I don't know that until we've started the process and she's implementing the actions that needs to be implemented. And then we can say, okay, are we happy with this rate of loss? yeah, I'm happy. I feel good. Like, it's moving. I feel like hunger, energy, biofeedback, everything is in a good spot. Or if it's like, well, actually, I feel good. I actually want things to move a bit faster. Okay, then we can pull a lever and we can do, okay, let's get the rate of loss up from maybe 0.3 to 0.4, adding a bit more cardio, making a calorie adjustment. If it's too slow, then we'll have to have a discussion around, okay, well, are you actually being adherent, or do we need to make an adjustment? So it's sort of like, I think that's such a powerful thing about the coaching process is it's so important to have the data and then to make inferences based on that. And the more data you have, the better your predictions and stuff going to be, as I said in the beginning.
The data is only going to be reliable if the client is doing their part.
Yes,
and they're communicating.
Because that's another thing. Like if the client isn't doing what they're set out to be doing, then the data is not, like, nothing's going to happen, right? Then it's going to be hard to...
In a way, it's almost both. It's a benefit regardless of whether the client is being adherent or not, because the way to look at it is that, okay, if we've got a certain rate of loss we're expecting and that's not happening, well, that's going to shine a light on the fact that the client's actions are not reflecting their goals. They're not doing the things that's been expected of them. It's very rare. It's a very rare situation, especially if you've done a good job with your onboarding. And let's just say there are any sort of metabolic issues that you have to deal with. For example, we know that someone's got a thyroid issue, maybe someone's got, insulin resistance, or there's anything, PCOS, something that ultimately slows their metabolic rate, their BMR is lower. And you know that for that particular individual, it's going to be a bit harder, it's going to take a bit longer. They might have to diet on lower calories to get there. And as a result, you might have to do it in stages to make it something they can actually adhere to and do over time. But assuming you've managed all of that, the data is going to tell you if that client is sticking to what they're meant to be doing or not. But like you said, the clients need to actually give us and give themselves long enough to see those trends play out in the direction that we expect it. But let's assume that the clients are being adherent. Well, like you said, and that's something I think is such a good point that you made, is it allows you to then go, right, I've got these levers that I can pull on. I've got this whole calories in thing. I've got these whole calories out, and actually multiple levers over here I can pull on that side of things. And depending on the rate of loss that we actually want to promote, and maybe, like you say, a client wants to, okay, like maybe this is moving a bit too quick, let's slow it down. Or actually, I want to ramp this up a little bit, and mentally, like, it's like they maybe start seeing a little bit of progress, and that gives them the, right, let's just push on now. Or it might just be that they're dropping too quickly, and because obviously we want to maintain as much muscle mass during a fat loss phase as possible, right?
More is not always better.
Exactly.
So depends.
You may want to, but actually we need to pump the brakes a little bit, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, or psychology also. You may want to factor in a bit of a, dieting can be tough mentally as well. So you may actually want to slow things down for a week, or just to give that little bit of a break. Like, it depends on the client.
100%.
Yeah.
But let's move on to that next component, because we talked about the managing expectations. I think that sums that up pretty well. But in order to manage expectations, communication.
Yeah.
Communication, I can get a good sense of how a client is going to be working with them. Not fully, but you can get a pretty good sense based on how they are in that initial consult, because I'm sort of reading them as a person in terms of, right, how are they likely to communicate? Is this someone who is actively going to be curious? They're going to ask, open questions and generally actually want to hear the answers, versus, well, I'm going to do the bare minimum. I'm only going to touch base when it's my weekly check-in. And even when I need help, I'm going to go away, make mistakes, and then write it up in my weekly check-in, rather than reaching out to my coach at the time when I'm going through those struggles mentally or physically, and let them know that's happening in that moment. This is, I think, for me, the biggest difference between a client who's super successful with their results and clients that tend to be either a bit slower or not getting what they want. So you can tell a lot about that in the initial consultation, but as you rightly said earlier, you can't really truly know until you've got a number of weeks down the line. You get a sense of, what's the WhatsApp? We use WhatsApp to communicate. If you're using something different, that's fine, but let's just say WhatsApp. What's their direct communication like through that one-to-one channel? What's their daily and weekly check-ins looking like? You get a really good sense based on how they fill that data out. Yeah. Because the communication isn't just direct in terms of, WhatsApp or voice notes or whatever else. It's also how detailed are they when they submit their weekly check-in. That's obviously still communication. It's a reflective and an introspective piece of communication, but it's still communication. And so if I get a client who sends a weekly check-in and it's very sparse, like 3 words or 1 line, and that in itself is also a bit of a red flag, because you're like, well, and we'll get into the specifics of the actual week to week of coaching in a moment. But yeah, communication. If a client is not communicating with their coach in a not only effective but an efficient manner, because also what isn't efficient for a coach to manage is to be sent 5 to 10 minute podcasts multiple times a week to then listen to, because that's just like the reality is a coach may have 20, 30, 40, 50 other clients that they have to work with. It's not going to be possible for them to be able to take that on board and come back to you multiple times a week with many podcasts. So clients being able to get across what it is they need from you, but being able to do so in an efficient way so that you can come back to them and give them what they need in that moment. That also makes a client far more coachable as well. What would you add to that? What's some stuff from your side, from a communication standpoint, that maybe you find has frustrated you a little bit when it comes to the clients that you work with?
No, I mean, a lot of it is going to be the same things that you said when it's specifically to like communication, like not giving a lot of, just you can get a sense when somebody's engaged in the process and driving the process forward with you because they're excited about their goals, versus somebody who's, you kind of almost feel like you have to drag up the hill in their hair. Like that's how I felt sometimes with certain clients, when you just have to like, well, you know, pull things out of them. Like I'm trying to make them do something they don't really want to do. But ultimately, as I said earlier, you can only facilitate it. So you got to want it. You're going to want to be engaged. Like there needs to be that kind of drive, I think. And then I think also purely from the question of being coachable, which is nothing really to do with communication, but if somebody is looking to get a coach, I think it's very important that you are open to doing things that you may feel uncomfortable doing and stepping out of your comfort zone. Because I have also in the past worked with a client who's telling me, I want to achieve this goal. I want to build muscle. I want to get strong. I want to look toned. I want to do all these things. But I don't want to stop doing my 5 Hyrox classes and my this and my that. I don't want to eat carbs. I don't want to do this and you know, like there's just a lot of like,
I want to go out and drink 4 or 5 drinks every weekend.
Exactly. I want to look a certain way, but I also want to do X, Y, and Z. Like you have to be ready to do things that are different from what you're currently doing, because otherwise nothing's going to change. And this is kind of
I suppose it's the idea of, they like the idea of the goal, like the bit
result, you like the idea,
but they don't like the changes that are required to get there. And so I think that when you had that image there of dragging the person by their hair, the thing I think of with that, imagine their feet dragging on the ground, and the first thing that comes to mind is friction. And that's a very good word to describe it, is that you're in the coaching process and the client is constantly putting friction points into what you're trying to do, and unnecessary friction points often as well.
I get it, because I can empathize with the client and doing things that are scary and new and not doing things that maybe you like to do for a period. And you know, I always, and what I say to my clients in the situations, like I always try and work with my clients and their wants as much as I can. Like I'm not like a military officer saying, no, you can. Like it's a discussion, it's a conversation. So then it's like,
I often like to say it's a partnership, not a dictatorship.
Yeah. So it's sort of like, you know, as a coach, you always have your client's best interest at heart. So anything that I say is with that in mind. And then, sometimes you may have to compromise on certain things. That may mean then, okay, well, we may take you a bit longer to get to where you want to get to because you're not willing to do X, Y, and Z. So are you prepared for that? So it's just being, you know, open and transparent with that. But I think that's a big one. People going into wanting a certain goal or outcome, but not fully like they know it on some level, but not fully really appreciating that you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone and do things that you don't want to, you don't
make sacrifices.
Sacrifices and, you know, maybe, and let go of certain comforts. So with that, I don't mean necessarily like food, but it could be like going to group classes and, you know, for example, or as many.
Let's be honest, the whole point of a reason for someone reaching out to you in the first place is because they're currently ticking along doing whatever it is they're doing, and it's not getting them to the desired outcome that they're looking for, or desired set of outcomes. And it's so funny that this is often the case, is that those are the very things that they want to then continue doing once they come into the coaching process. I mean, I don't get that as much nowadays with the audience I work with. Obviously working with mostly coaches there, for the most part, not always, but usually they kind of know what they want. They know what they need from the coaching process. But I guess when I was working with more Gen Pop clients, and certainly you are as at the moment, you do get a lot of that. It's this almost holding on to, well, that's what I know, even though they know deep down it's not what they need, because it's what they know and it's what's familiar. Anything that's a step away from that is very scary. So you have to empathize and sort of let them know and reassure them that, hey, like, I know this is different, but trust me, that discomfort you're feeling right now, you just need to lean into that.
Because I'm not doing you any favors as a coach if I continue to feed into your current narrative that is holding you back. That's something I've probably learned a bit more recently as a coach. It's, you know, you have to,
I think the next point of that, we've talked about a few things now. We've obviously talked about right at the start, you know, making sure that they're in a stage of readiness. We've talked about managing expectations, and we've talked about the importance of communication. Something that comes to mind for me that sort of goes the next step beyond that, and this sort of segues us nicely into the actual coaching itself and the sort of some of the practical application, both from the coach's side and from the client side, is the minimum non-negotiables.
Yes.
And what that actually looks like within a coaching process. So for us, I'm really clear with clients, and it's just coming back to what you were talking about now with the communication. One of the things I'll often say to clients right at the start of the coaching process is, listen, I will be very direct. It's my nature to be incredibly direct, but I will never be rude. I'll never be overly harsh, but I'll always be fair. So clients knowing from the start that you're going to call them out in the bullshit, for lack of a better term. Obviously, you're not going to do it in a bad way or a nasty way. You'd be professional at all times, but they need to know that that relationship, first and foremost, is a relationship of accountability. They need to know that if they are not doing their part, you are going to shine a spotlight on that, but you're not just going to do that and make them feel bad about it. You're going to offer solutions to help them overcome that, right? So I think part of that and getting around that is also making sure that between both sides, you understand what the minimum non-negotiables, the main deliverables within the coaching process are. So this is something that we obviously share regardless of audience. We have a certain amount of data that we expect within our daily check-ins, and we expect those daily check-ins to be completed every single day. Now, it might be that at the start with some clients that might feel daunting. They maybe it's tracking nutrition, maybe it's filling out the daily check-ins. Maybe say, hey, listen, if you can at least fill out 5 out of 7 days, especially if they're struggling to do it, like they're struggling to get into the habit of doing it daily.
A lot of that is habit. When there's ever a challenge with my clients, it's always like, oh, forget. But then the whole point of the process is that it's to be focused on the process. So you need to be mentally and consciously on. And the more you are, the more, the easier it will get. It becomes like a habit. And then you'll start thinking more you become more conscious about your behaviors and patterns. And also, I'm sort of hijacking what you were saying, but there's also an element of when you're tracking your consistency and tracking progress, whether that be seeing how your weight is changing, step targets, your workouts, that's also positive reinforcement. Yes. You can kind of look back and be like, well, I did this. So when you have a bad day, maybe you're like, oh, I missed my workout today, or I had a meal and it didn't really I didn't hit my calorie targets, or didn't focus properly on my habits, or whatever it is, because it depends on what your goals are and your action goals are. But look, I had 5 days that was really good, and then I had this one day. So it just helps you see what the reality of the situation, and maybe your one slip up wasn't actually that bad in the grand scheme of things.
You've catastrophized it.
So for people who do that, and I work with a lot of women like that, perfectionists, or one bad day leading into blowouts or whatever. So, but being able to just be keeping your intentions on the daily actionables and seeing and celebrating the wins. And the positives, it just makes the wobble seem less of an issue. And also then it allows you to communicate with me about your wobbles so that we can actually see what happens. So we can, next time it happens, because that's the thing, a wobble is just a learning opportunity.
100%.
It's okay, there's an obstacle. I didn't foresee this. What can we do next time this happens? You can't go back in time, but the whole point is to learn from it and do better next time.
100%. Well, I think this is something we're going to get into the next episode of our podcast, is the importance of the different phases of coaching. And because I think it's a good time to mention this. If you think about one of the reasons we do a priming phase is to get someone psychologically and physically ready for the actual coaching and to go into a more focused phase, right? So to your point, a lot of that initial priming phase, especially when it comes to their check-ins and their daily non-negotiables, is it's actually figuring out where the client is so you can meet them where they're at. So what you're essentially referring to there is we might have the idea that we'd love them to do 7 days of tracking or 7 days of daily data, but it might just be they're just not there. And so what is between, and you have to agree this, of course, between coach and client, what would we define as success for now? We know what we're trying to aim towards. We want to get to the 7 days, but for now, if you can do at least this much, that's a successful week. Let's then build on that.
It's so not tracking data for the sake of tracking data either. It's just what's relevant right now. I'm
going to hijack your point now. You did to me, I'm going to do it to you now. I think you were talking about a client being involved in the process. So the term I often like to use is, and I always say 2 things when it comes to coaching about there's no coincidence these type of clients get the best results, is the clients who communicate the best and the clients who are the most intellectually involved in the coaching process. So to your point, they're filling out their data, they're expanding enough in their weekly check-ins, they're messaging you proactively on WhatsApp to give you updates or to ask questions. It's just no coincidence whatsoever that these are the clients that get the best results. And to your point, because they're intellectually involved in the process, but that is positively reinforcing all of their good behaviors all the time as well, which I think the positive reinforcement is a great point to add. So that's minimum non-negotiables. For us, we're often saying, right, there's a certain amount of daily check-in data that we're looking for. There's then the weekly check-ins, just to touch on that specifically. And I sort of hinted to it earlier that clients will sometimes fill out very sparse weekly check-ins. I've had to have many conversations, and I get it. Like my audience with the coaches, they're almost like quote unquote what coaches used to market to all the time, busy professionals, but they're kind of becoming a lot more like the clients that they coach, right? Where they've got crazy schedules, they work very long hours, up early mornings, home late at night, especially if they're trainers or they're online coaches with a massive workload, or they do like me, a hybrid of the both, where they've got almost two lives. They've got a personal trainer life in the morning, and then they've got the online coaching life later in the day. So we have busy schedules, but here's the reality. Your clients do too, and you're expecting them to do this. So the reality is that the weekly check-ins has to have enough data, enough feedback. Like we run our weekly check-ins in a way where there's sort of like a rating and then explain why you gave that. Yours might be a little bit different now. Mine's is still a little bit more like that. But in any case, compared to the daily check-ins, which is very data-driven, the weekly check-ins are much more introspective and reflective. And given the nature of that, if you're not giving enough of that.
Yeah, like there's certain, with my clients, and you know, it's like, well, okay, there's certain minimum things, maybe many questions in the form is like, well, what are your wins? What were your challenges? And really important is like, what are your goals for next week? That is so important, because if you miss that step, like, what are you actually committing to do? What is your low bound, high bound goals, whatever they are? Like you have to, that's so important. Like, what are you committing to doing? Because that's your benchmark when you check in next week. Okay, you said you were going to do X, Y, and Z. So based on your current week, and they have to be always, they have to feel achievable based on the week that's coming. And this is also so important, because you may have a week where you have lots of stress, you know, you have deadlines, like things that you, commitments, work, kids, whatever that is. Okay, so this week it's only realistic for me to go to the gym twice. Normally your program may be 4 sessions, but now I'm only going to go twice. So you say, well, I'm going to go twice, because then it means that when you check in next week, you don't feel bad for only doing 2 sessions, because you already knew. Expectations. Yes, because then you avoid that, because or you have if you have unrealistic expectations. I have this shit busy week. I'm going to go to the gym 4 weeks. I'm going to. Just the goals that you set every week is so important, and that you take the time to reflect on those goals. What is realistic? And then at the end of that week, you can look back and be, I did 2 sessions. It's not my 4 sessions, but I did 2 sessions. And that's what I had a busy week. And I'm really happy that I got that done. You know, that's how I approach my own goals. And, you know, it's not a fixed, my goals, action goals are not fixed. They're a little bit fluid depending on what's going on in my life in the coming week. So, yeah, of course, if you're a photo shoot prep or if you're comp prepping, you're like, it's different. Like, you kind of have to, you have very little, you need to, like, that's, you know, what you need to do, your outputs is like literally has to be high up in the priorities and things. But even so, even with your clients, it's not going to be perfect every week. It doesn't need to be. But it has to be as a certain level of standard has to be met.
100%. I think just to maybe touch on like why the weekly check-in, one, being submitted on time, gets overlooked. It's being on time with the actual submission of that, because if you submit that to your coach late, then you're missing out on the implementation of changes that may be really important to achieving your goal. But it backs up the daily. The daily check-ins is just data, and you said how it's so important to have data, but data without context means very little. The weekly check-in for us, at least the first sort of half or 2/3 of the check-in form, is very much providing context to your data, right? So that's still important. But even if maybe the client was communicating a lot over WhatsApp and that context was given in that way, like you said, that last third of the form with the more open-ended questions, it's probably the most important part of the form. The wins, what were your challenges, and then what specific help do you need from me? Because like you say, then you can set those expectations. And in that last question of, okay, give me 1 to 3 things that would make sure that next week is a successful week for you, because it's that intention setting. You're setting those intentions ahead of time.
Keep your attention on your intentions. A business mentor said that. It's one of the things he said a lot. Like keep your, you know, the daily accountability is keeping your attention on your intentions, because otherwise what happens, life happens, and then what happened with this week? The week was so busy, and you know that's an excuse. That's, you know, the week didn't just happen. Like your focus was just elsewhere. Exactly. So you know, and we often tell clients focus on the process, not the end result, because you have to get the process right for the end result to eventuate in the first place. True. So that's on the weekly check-ins. But then what else with the training? Form checks. It's a really tricky one, depending on the clients you work with, the level of confidence. But another minimum non-negotiable for us is, we want to make sure that we can review training. For me, I don't feel like you are properly online coaching someone if you are not reviewing a client's training videos, because if you've got a training program in place and they're going in the gym and they're filling out their training log, if you don't know the quality of what that looks like, because you can see a client fill out a log with a certain amount of weights, a certain amount of reps, but how those reps are performed, how close those sets are taken to failure, the mechanics that they're performing it with is everything.
in terms of what they're actually going to extract from that. So I think minimum non-negotiables, at least from my side, I tell clients, like, unless we've agreed that we're not going to do any form check videos this week, I expect at least 2 to 4 form check videos so that we can make sure that we're constantly leveling up your application of this training from your program.
Yep.
So I think that's a big one as well. Anything else that you can think of that we're just we've maybe missed over?
No, I think, managing expectations, communication, tracking the data that's relevant, doing your check-ins on time.
Yeah, I think we've covered
because the
most of
training
stuff,
side
right?
of things kind of falls into, like the tracking side, but the form check videos, I guess we are a little bit more, put that maybe a bit higher on the importance than some coaches.
Yeah, for sure.
Do,
So I mean, if you're listening to this podcast and you've ever seen coaches talk about on social media, what does it mean to be coachable? Hopefully, us getting into it in a little bit more detail is just provide a little bit more context on exactly why that is. And maybe if you're already working with a coach or you're thinking about working with a coach, this also maybe even reveals how valuable coaching is if it's done correctly as well.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Fitness Rants podcast.
If you got value from this conversation, be sure to hit subscribe on either YouTube or your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss any of our weekly rants.
Oh, and if you're feeling generous, we would really appreciate it if you would drop us a 5-star rating or a review, because it would help more listeners like you to find the show.
If you haven't already, be sure to connect with us on Instagram. We'll leave our handles in the episode description.
Thanks for tuning in. We look forward to having you back for our next episode.